Self-Evident is a platform that is dedicated to speaking truths that were once self-evident and doing so in love. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode. I'm so glad you're here. And did you know that homeschoolers are happier? Yes, you heard that right. Not only is homeschooling better for your education, but it is also objectively better for you to be a healthier, happier, and more successful person. We are going to be getting into these study results on today's episode. You are going to want to stick around. But before I get into that, I want to tell you about something really exciting. Riley Gaines is coming to the Midwest. Illinois Family Institute's annual Faith, Family, and Freedom Banquet is featuring her as their keynote speaker. So you are going to want to be on the lookout for those early bird tickets that will be announced soon, and I will keep you all updated on that information as well. Okay, homeschoolers are happier. What does that mean? What does the study find? Well, before we get into why homeschooling makes you a happier person, I think it's important to go back to the U.S. Department of Education. This is where all of this is stemming from, where all of these education issues started happening, and we need to start at the beginning. A lot of people don't realize that the U.S. Department of Education has not existed since 1776, that it's actually a rather new invention, so to speak, of America to have a Department of Education at the federal level overseeing government schools. This is actually a new thing. So this is actually according to the Department of Education's website. I will link all of the sources I use for you guys in the description box so that you can fact check me if you feel like fact checking me. So the 1960s saw even more expansion into how far the federal government wanted to go in regulating education and overseeing education. And this was actually due to President Lyndon Johnson's war on poverty. And his war on poverty called for the creation of many programs to improve education for poor students at all levels, early childhood, post-secondary, etc. This expansion continued into the 1970s with national efforts to help racial minorities, women, people with disabilities, non-English speaking students, all of these people, he wanted them to be able to gain equal access to education. So in October of 1979, Congress passed the Department of Education Organization Act. And this was created by combining these offices from federal agencies all over the place. So the department began actually operating in 1980. So in the 1860s, just to give you an overview of how far education has gone since the 1800s as opposed to today, in the 1860s, a budget of $15,000 and 4 employees handled education. By 1965, the Office of Education had more than 2,100 employees and a budget of $1.5 billion. As of mid-2010, the department has nearly 4,300 employees and a budget of about $60 billion. And that's just in 2010. We don't have new numbers for 2020 or 2025 yet. That's just in 2010 with the overview that the government website gave me. Very interesting to see how education started extremely small, started localized, started with a bunch of programs that just wanted to make education equally accessible for all different kinds of people, especially those who are minorities, who struggle with poverty. And now to see where it's gone today, of how overreaching the Department of Education is, of how far-reaching they are. It's very interesting to see. Plus, it's important to note the reason why the U.S. Department of Education was built, was enacted, and was given its origin story, so to speak. So the United States Department of Education, again, was established by Congress in 1979. It didn't begin operation until 1980, but this department was created to promote educational excellence and equal access to education. The point I want to hone in on is it was created to promote educational excellence. This is very important to note, that this was the main thing that this department was supposed to do. And if you paid attention to the recent Nations Report Card, also called the National Assessment of Educational Progress, this report card found that reading scores for 4th grade and 8th grade students had once again declined, and that math scores for eighth graders had also declined once again. And this is just one example of the declining rate of how bad actually educational excellence is in government schools. In Illinois alone, if you go to the Illinois report card, or any state you live in, there should be a report card on the public schools in your state if you look for it. You can search your district, you can search your schools, and you will find out what the literacy rate is, what the math score rate is, what the science rate is. It gives you all these scores. You would be shocked to know that in a lot of different public schools in the state of Illinois, there is 0% reading at grade level in actually a few schools. And that most of the time, you're getting about 40% literacy rate across the board, in particularly Illinois government schools. So not only has the Department of Education failed its mission with promoting educational excellence, that is not educationally excellent to have 60% of your students failing to read at grade level, and yet you're still graduating them in record numbers. That is not educationally excellent. Not only have they failed to do this, but in addition to this, they failed on a grave moral level. And I can go into story after story after story, and I'm focusing on Illinois right now for a reason, because Illinois is a big blue state, which has a lot of issues, and one of the biggest proponents of keeping the U.S. Department of Education intact, which is why I'm honing in on Illinois today. And WirePoints recently released a sample of what fourth graders in Illinois are learning about transgenderism in public schools. And once again, I can go into story after story of particularly Illinois government schools, Chicago public schools, especially, of what is being taught in the classroom when it comes to gender identity, when it comes to gender theory, when it comes to sexuality. But this is actually what fourth graders are being read to in school in Illinois. This is what the book says, quote, "You might feel like a boy, you might feel like a girl. You might feel like both boy and girl, or like neither. You might feel like your gender changed from day to day or from year to year." End quote. So on all fronts, public education is a failure. We just looked at, first of all, that they're a failure on an educational level. It is not educationally excellent to have 40% on a large scale, generally speaking, 40% of Illinois public school attendees do not read or can read at grade level. So 60% cannot. That's not educationally excellent. But in addition to this, you have a moral and spiritual failing of the fact that public school attendees as young as fourth grade are learning about transgenderism, of how you might be a boy or a girl, who knows? Or you might be both or neither. Oh my goodness. It's like choosing your shoes. It's like choosing which shirt you want to wear. What do you want to wear today? Oh, I want to be a boy, or oh, I want to be a girl. Gender doesn't mean anything. And they're learning that at fourth grade. So on all fronts, public education is a failure. The U.S. Department of Education has failed its basic mission to promote educational excellence. But in addition to this, and this was the meat of the episode, they have failed on an objective standard to make kids feel successful and make them happy, make them feel good about themselves and confident in their skills, their talents, their educational abilities. It's failed on that as well. And you'll be interested to hear all of these facts. It shocked me that homeschoolers are happier. Objectively speaking, they're happier. So the Cardus Education Survey, it's a Christian think tank which is based in Canada. They interviewed adults aged 24 to 39. So we have some Gen Z, we have some millennial mix in there. The oldest Gen Z at the moment is 28 years old. So we have some millennials as well included in this survey. And here's what the study found, quote, "Long-term homeschoolers who spend at least 8 years being educated at home, quote, were more likely to be married, had the lowest divorce rate, and had more children on average." So from a societal perspective, actually, homeschooling is better. You're more likely to be married. You're more likely to have a lower divorce rate, which means more stable families, and have more children. We have a declining birth rate, a declining fertility rate right now. Homeschoolers might be our only hope. If this study is correct, which I know it is, given the credibility of their sources, homeschooling seems to be the answer to these birth rate problems. Because if you're homeschooled, you're more likely to get married and you're more likely to have more children. And going on to quote from Ben Johnson from the Washington Stand, he notes further results from this survey, and this is what he says, quote, homeschooling for the long term benefited religious faith and family stability. Belief in God increased progressively with the amount of time one spent outside the public school system. 72% of long-term homeschooled students believed in God, compared to 61% of medium-term homeschoolers, 56% of short-term homeschoolers, and 41% of those who were never schooled at home. Look at that. 72%, if you're homeschooled for at least 8 years, 72% believe in God. 41% never homeschooled, believe in God. Look at that gap. It's incredible. And he goes on to note, those educated at home the longest also reported the highest levels of Bible reading and church attendance, and were most likely to say they felt the presence of God at least once a week. And now I referenced the happiness factor earlier, and this is what the Cardus report found about happiness. Quote, compared to the other groups, long-term homeschoolers, again, those who spent at least 8 years being homeschooled, reported the lowest levels of depression and anxiety. They were the least likely to say they feel helpless dealing with life's problems. They exhibited the highest levels of optimism, gratitude, life satisfaction. Again, amazing. You have better life satisfaction, more optimism, more gratitude, you're more stable, you're more likely to be religious, to be married, to have children if you are homeschooled for at least 8 years. Absolutely fascinating. So Meg Kilganon, who is a senior fellow for education studies at the Family Research Council, made a very important point when the Washington Stand asked her for her opinion on the survey results. And this is what she said. She said, since parents are the primary educators of their children, closing the U.S. Department of Education is a vital first step in a long process of reforming education in America. End quote. She could not be more right. Parents, you are your child's primary educator. And this was understood even going back to the Old Testament in the book of Deuteronomy, when God tells his people that you are to talk about my statutes when you wake up, when you walk around, when you lie down. You are to teach them continually to your children. Parents, you are your child's primary educator. And we have this warped idea in America that, oh, the teachers educate and I parent. And there's no conflation of those. When no, if you send your child to a school, the teacher is meant to be a supporter of what they are or what they should be learning at home. Parents, again, you are your child's primary educator. Your child is looking at you. How do you react when anxious things happen in life? How do you react when a family member dies? How do you react when dinner is 30 minutes late? How do you react when something at work doesn't go well? How do you react to your spouse when they frustrate you? Your children are watching you. You are your child's primary educator, whether you want to be or not. God designed it that way. We are discipling our children on a daily basis. And discipling doesn't just mean sit down and I'll teach you a bunch of important things that you need to know to be a good person or to do life well. Although it includes that. The book of Proverbs is full of that Proverbs, things that you can do, behaviors that you can either have or behaviors you can avoid to have a better life. Yes, that is included in discipleship, but discipleship is also a way of life. Again, your children are looking at you, parent, for how do I react to things? How do I react to people? You are your child's primary educator. And as this study shows, children do better when their primary source of education and learning are from people who genuinely love them and genuinely want to seek their greatest good. The only people that fit that description are parents. Your teachers, Christian teachers, love them. I was private educated in a Christian school. Those teachers are dedicated people. I have nothing bad to say against them at all. But they don't love me in the same way that my parents love me. So, parents, I guess the takeaway maybe from this episode is don't be afraid to homeschool your children. I know there's still this stigma around that says that homeschoolers are weird or homeschooling is weird. Like, what do you mean you homeschool? Don't you want your child to be socialized? What, you want them to be awkward people for the rest of your life? Why wouldn't you public school them? But don't listen to that, because it's obvious from this study that if you homeschool parent, your child is more likely to be happy, to be successful, to be married, to have children, to be grateful, to be optimistic, to have good life preferences, to have faith, to have a faithful lifestyle with their family. And isn't that what we want as parents? It's what I want for my children. And you know, my husband and I, we have a great affinity for private education. Both of us were private school educated, loved it, loved the atmosphere, loved the ability to be around kids our own age, to share experiences. But I'll tell you what, this survey is making me think that, you know what, maybe homeschool is, the option. I'm not saying that private education from a Christian biblical worldview is wrong, because I still love it. But I do have to say, this survey is making me think that, you know what, maybe homeschooling is better for our children than even going to a private Christian school. Again, parents, don't be afraid to homeschool. Your children have a statistically better chance of turning out a faithful, godly young man and young woman who is actually educated, who actually knows how to think, what they believe, why they believe it. All right, that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. And until next time, let us firmly rely on the protection of divine providence. This is self-evident.